When the Switch first came out, Nintendo got a little bit of flack for not having very many games right out of the gate, but it wasn't very long until the library started tearing quite a bit of ass. However, as we all know, no matter how many games come out for any console, most people are always going to want more, even if their backlog of games is too big to finish in a lifetime. So to keep all the rabid Switch owners at bay, Nintendo decided to hold online play hostage under the condition that we rent a small collection of NES and Super Nintendo games, but seeing as how most of us just wanted the virtual console, this obviously wasn't going to be enough to calm the riots, meaning that the above average sized den's gonna have to start pumping out at least 20 more games from each of their classic consoles if they want to stop getting prank calls every 15 minutes.
Hello.
Obviously, it'd be way better if they just brought the virtual console back and let us permanently buy whatever we wanted, but that's a topic for another day. And if you've been following this channel for a while, then you'd already know that I've taken it upon myself to let Nintendo know which 20 games I should start with for the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo 64, GameCube, and even Sega Dreamcast for some reason. But despite the fact that I did all that hard work without expecting any kind of reward in return, I've still yet to receive a memorial plaque in my honor at Nintendo HQ, so in an attempt to immortalize myself, I figured I'd bail N-Dog out once again by choosing 20 games from the Wii's library for them to put on the Switch's online service. I know converting the Wii Remote's motion controls to work with the Joy-Cons is probably a huge pain in the ass, so for this video, let's just pretend they've either figured all that out or somehow made Wii Remotes for the Switch. Also, try to keep in mind that this isn't a top 20 Wii games video, but rather which 20 Wii games would be the best to start with on the Switch's online service, meaning that I will be holding some notable titles back so they can make a bigger impact later on. So with all that being said, make yourselves comfortable in your YouTube viewing chairs, put your father to bed so at least he doesn't wet the couch, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the world's healthiest baby boy, Cameron all one word, to tell you the 20 best Wii games to start with for the Switch's online catalog if it were to ever happen. Numbers 1 and 2. Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Because what kind of a jabroni wouldn't choose what's considered by many, including yours truly, to be the best 3D Mario games ever made? I mean, if you're the type of person who thinks there could be too much Mario in space with wacky gravity mechanics and power-ups, then you should be put in solitary confinement with Harvey Whippleman or whatever his name is. Actually, to be honest, I was pretty torn on whether or not I should include both Galaxy games, or just put the first one on for now and hold off on the sequel until an update later on. I mean, that way it'd give the original a chance to shine a little bit and make people want the sequel that much more. And even though the story to these games isn't really all that important, I still think you could appreciate both of them even more if you play them in order. But at the end of the day, way more people played the first game, so including both of them would make it more likely that Switch owners would get to play something new. And besides, the Switch's NES library started with 2 Mario games as well, so frig it, I say put both Galaxy games on here. Number 3. New Super Mario Bros. Wii. The New Super Mario Bros. Series has had a bit of a bad reputation over the years, but I think if you can ignore how much more imaginative they could have been, they're all still fun games in their own right. And if nothing else, the Wii version of New Super Mario Bros. Did outsell both Mario Galaxies 1 and 2 combined, making it one of the more popular titles on the console, so given that the file size is even smaller than my PP, I don't think anyone can argue that this game deserves to be here. I mean, after all, 2D Mario platformers are still great even at their worst, except for the lost levels, of course. That game sucks. Number 4. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but the Legend of Zelda fanbase is probably the most fickle fanbase in all of video games, especially when it comes to Skyward Sword. First, they loved this game so much that they went into a blind rage over GameSpot giving it a good but not great review, and then they changed their mind on the motion controls and decided that it was too linear. Then fast forward a few years later, and fans all over the world are puking their pants in happiness over the series producer teasing a Switch port at a Zelda concert. Regardless of how you may feel about this game, though, I think we can all agree that it makes sense to put it in the Switch's Wii catalog if there ever is such a thing. Personally, I do think the game's a little bit too linear, and recalibrating the motion controls every 2 seconds is even more annoying than being told not to run as a kid. But aside from that and a few other minor complaints I have, I still think the game's fantastic, and I'll fight to the death that it has the best 3D dungeons in the entire series. You might argue that Twilight Princess should have also been here, or that it should have at least been included first if you're gonna save one for later, but honestly, I'd hold off on doing anything with the Wii version of that game if I were Nintendo. I mean, let's not forget that it was made for the GameCube and that the motion and pointer controls were just kinda tacked on so that the Wii'd have a strong launch title for the hardcore gamers. And don't get me wrong, I thought the motion controls worked fine on the Wii version, and I actually prefer the pointer controls for the bow and arrow, even if I do have to deal with a weird-ass sensor bar. But if you think about it, it'd be kinda weird to put multiple versions of the same game on one console, and if you ask me, I'd rather the Wii U version get a full re-release over putting it in the GameCube or Wii catalogs, but that's just me. All I know is that if Skyward Sword's not getting a full HD remaster anytime soon, then frig it, put it in the Switch's Wii library. Number 5. Mario Kart Wii. Truth be told, I've only played this version of Mario Kart for like 15 minutes of my entire life, and if I'm being honest, I didn't much care for it at the time. But even so, it's probably illegal in some states not to include a Mario Kart game in a retro Nintendo library, and since the game sold over 18 billion copies worldwide, I'm sure people have quite a bit of nostalgia towards this one. Plus, it's not like Mario Kart's ever truly bad anyway if you're not comparing it to other games in the series, so it's probably about time I give this version another try anyway. Number 6. Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Oh boo, I hate Smash Brawl, it's garbage, OMG, they move so slow. Can it, Toots, it's still a good game, damn it. Sure, it might not be the most endearing Smash game to the competitive scene, but much like Mario Kart Wii, assloads of people played this game when it came out all the way back in 1994, so this is another Wii game that I'd wager many have nostalgia for. Besides, it's not like it's a bad game anyway, it's friggin' Smash Bros, you turkey. You play as Nintendo characters, whoop your jabroni friend's ass until he beats you up in real life, and then there's obviously the subspace mode that none of the other Smash games can compete with, so suck it, you bimbo. Number 7. Kirby's Return to Dreamland. I know a lot of you may be too afraid to say what you're thinking, but since I've been sipping back on Grandpa's cough medicine the past few days, my brain's filter isn't quite working as well as it normally does, so I'm just gonna go ahead and speak for most people and say that Kirby games are a little bit overrated. Sure, they were great when the world's largest love machine, Masahiro Sakurai, was involved, and there have been some unique ones here and there in between. But when it comes to the standard Kirby adventures, I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks that they're all just okay, mainly because they're way too easy. But you know what, sometimes I just want to turn my brain off and play a game while I think about all the other shit that's going on in my life, like how I'm trying to quit my addiction to drinking cough syrup, and that's where games like Kirby's Return to Dreamland come in handy. Sure, it may be a run-of-the-mill 2.5D Kirby platformer, but even so, it's everything that it's supposed to be, and it's still a heck of a mess of fun. And on top of that, it's also 4 players, which is perfect for playing with your rehab buddies. Just make sure none of them come over while my neighbor Terry's in the living room with his chemistry set if you don't want any of them to relapse. Number 8. Kirby's Epic Yarn. While it is important to have a tried and true Kirby game, Epic Yarn's one of the more unique Kirby adventures I was talking about earlier. The graphics and art direction where everything's made of yarn's always gonna hold up, even in 1,000 years, especially when Kirby transforms into the cutest goddamn vehicles ever. And while the gameplay is still a little bit on the easy side, the calming music would make you furious if the game were to contradict the mood by giving you too much trouble, and to be honest, I've never actually tried 100%ing this myself, so I'm really not sure how much the difficulty increases if you try to collect everything. So, yeah, if you've 100%ed it yourself, or at least tried to, then let me know how hard it is in the comments. Number 9. WarioWare Smooth Moves. Honestly, I think every Nintendo console ought to have a WarioWare game, because if they're gonna keep pushing gimmicks on us, then this series is probably the best way to justify it. The gist of all these games is that you're thrown assloads of short tasks back to back, and you only have a matter of seconds to figure out what you're supposed to do with the system's unique controller and get it done. And more often than not, the solution usually involves you doing something ridiculous, which makes this the perfect party game. But speaking of party games... Number 10. Wii Sports. Let me guess, you were expecting Mario Party, right? Well, believe it or not, I actually didn't put any of them on here, because honestly, with the 64 and GameCube libraries likely coming to the Switch first, along with Super Mario Party already being a game, I just kinda think there shouldn't be any real rush to get the rest of the series on here since, like I said earlier, it's important to save some stuff for updates later on. Until then, though, I don't see the harm in gathering your family in the living room to play some good old-fashioned Wii Sports. Sure, the novelty of the motion controls don't mean jack squat anymore, but you know what? I think you'd be surprised at how much fun it'd actually be to play random sports with primitive motion controls. I mean, I can tell you right now that playing tennis on the Wii is a hell of a lot more fun than it is on the NES anyway. And besides, even though most of them were bundled, this is still the 3rd best-selling video game of all time after all, so I'm sure somebody out there still wants to play it. Number 11. Donkey Kong Country Returns. I know there's kind of a lot of 2D platformers on here, but even though motion controls are what most people think of when it comes to the Wii, I think the console making 2D platformers cool again is an aspect that gets overlooked more often than it should. And if you're looking for the best 2D platformer on the console, then I'd have to give Donkey Kong Country Returns the nod. Sure, there are some unnecessary motion control issues that were probably forced by Miyamoto, but other than that, the game's fantastic for completely different reasons than the original games were on the Super Nintendo. Rather than trying to mimic the physics of the Rare trilogy, Retro Studios decided to start all over from scratch and try something new while keeping the challenge intact, which makes the game feel fresh, not only for Donkey Kong Country, but really for 2D platformers in general. Although, if I'm being honest, I do kinda wish we had Kremlings here. Number 12. Super Paper Mario. I know most die-hard Paper Mario fans hate this game, but if you just accept the fact that it's not a proper sequel to the Thousand-Year Door, you're in for a real treat here. The game's basically what you'd get if classic Paper Mario had a baby with the 2D Mario series and didn't want to tell anybody who the father was. And because of the taboo of being a bastard, the game's been frowned upon its entire life, but if you actually take the time to get to know the poor little guy, he's actually quite nice. Number 13. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. The The best part about Fire Emblem games is that aside from the graphics and cutscenes, every game's more or less the same in terms of gameplay, and if you're into tactical RPGs, then it's always awesome. I actually never finished this one since I started playing it right after I finished Path of Radiance on the Gamecube, and I just kinda wanted to play other stuff at the time, but from what I did play, I could confidently say that this game's in the same league as its predecessor, and if nothing else, it's a tad pricey these days, so if the above average sized den isn't gonna remaster, then I say just toss it into the Switch's online catalog. Number 14. Sin and Punishment Star Successor. One of my favorite things about the Wii, along with 2D platformers, is all the amazing on-rail shooters the console had. But since I'm trying to come up with 20 games that'll appeal to as many people as possible, I thought I should probably narrow it down to just one here. And besides, most of the other ones are M-rated, which I'm sure Nintendo would prefer to avoid if these games are going to be perched right next to their family-friendly titles. However, that's not to say that Sin and Punishment's not one of the better on-rail shooters on the Wii anyway, but it would be nice if you could fully play with 2 people, though. But to be fair, the second player only being an assist is still pretty fun, especially if you're playing with a more casual gamer. Number 15. Punch-Out! Who would have thought that the best Punch-Out game in the entire series is also the most overlooked and underrated if you take your nostalgia butt plug out? I guess the reason for that's because most people probably just look at this as a beefy minigame or something like that, and to be fair, it is more simplistic than a 2D platformer. I mean, all you really do is memorize attack patterns until you win and move on, so it is less impressive in the late 2000s than it was in the 80s, but if we're playing old games anyway, then I want to play the best Punch-Out game more than I want to play the most nostalgic one. But anyway, since the NES and Super Nintendo started with 5 third-party games on the Switch's online service, then I think we should assume the same for the Wii, so let's move on to... Number 16. Zack and Wiki Quest for Barbarossas Treasure. Whenever anybody talks about this game, all you seem to hear about is how much of a shame it is that nobody played it back in the day, so I'm gonna spare you the guilt trip here and just say that it's a great puzzle game that I'm sure Capcom wouldn't mind Nintendo whoring out for some online subscriptions. Number 17. Okami. Speaking of Capcom games that need to be whored out for online subscriptions, this one right here is quite the doozy. It kinda feels like Capcom got fed up with Nintendo for only letting them make 2D Zelda games rather than 3D ones, and decided to just go ahead and make one of their own. And what we ended up with was Okami, where you play as a wolf instead of a human, except unlike that poser Link in Twilight Princess, you're an actual wolf in this game. Honestly, it is a bit hypocritical of me to put Okami on here, seeing as how it already has an HD remaster on the eShop, whereas I left Twilight Princess off of here just because there's a possibility of an HD remaster someday, but,
You know, one thing I should... Excuse me for 1 second. Of course.
Number 18. Sonic Colors. As we all know, 3D Sonic games have a bit of a spotty track record, but one of the games that most people seem to not hate is Sonic Colors, because for the first time in a long time, Sega dropped the idea of having a super serious story, gave us some new power-ups in the Wisps, and finally gave us a double jump that made controlling Sonic way easier in the slower sections. It may not be perfect, but all in all, Sonic Colors is an all-around fun game that I'm sure a lot of people would be pleasantly surprised playing for the first time. Number 19. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars. I don't know, I kind of felt like I should put a fighting game on here that isn't Smash Bros, and I know there's probably some licensing issues here with Tatsunoko being an animation company, and that a standalone re-release is probably a lot more likely, but what the hell, I figured I'd jump the shark and toss this in here anyway. To be honest, I've never actually played this game myself, but based on the tag team style gameplay, I'm just gonna go ahead and wing it and guess that it probably plays a lot like the other Capcom Versus games. And if that's the case, then I'd bet like $10 that this game's worthy of being included on here, cause let me tell you, just watching this gameplay makes me want to get my grubby little paws on it. Number 20. The Last Story. Back in 2011, the Wii U was right around the corner, but there were still a lot of notable JRPGs on the Wii that never saw a release outside of Japan, such as Xenoblade Chronicles, Pandora's Tower, and obviously The Last Story, which led to fans forming Operation Rainfall, which was a campaign meant to persuade Nintendo into bringing these games to North America. I've never actually played Pandora's Tower, and I would have included Xenoblade Chronicles, but there's already a remaster coming to the Switch that everyone insists is a remake, and I already put Okami here as well, so I probably need to add a little bit more variety to this list. But being honest, I didn't really play Xenoblade Chronicles for all that long, as I was way too confused at how the battle system worked at the time, but then right after that, I played Last Story, and let me tell you, that game was absolutely decent. Not great, but, you know, it was decent. Granted, it's been a long time since I beat this game, so some of the details are a little bit fuzzy thanks to all the cough syrup, but I don't know, I just kinda wasn't blown away by this game. However, I could definitely see why people would like this game, and I think I'd enjoy it more a second time now that action RPGs have grown on me over the years. And you know what, if it were on the Switch's online service, I think I'd give it another shot along with a lot of you as well. But anyway, that's my list. I left Animal Crossing City Folk out because I thought it might take away from some of the New Horizons community, and I know there's gonna be a lot of fury over not including the Metroid Prime trilogy, but I feel like it'd probably just be better to get a full re-release of that on the Switch. And even if that never happens, it'd be better to let this game get more attention as a standalone update later on, rather than being bundled in with 19 other games. After all, compared to other Nintendo franchises, Metroid really isn't all that popular, and I honestly think that's because a lot of people never actually played these games. So if you gave the trilogy a chance to shine on a single update, then I think it'd probably lead to creating new fans. And obviously that'd mean more Metroid games in the future. If you're still mad at me though, just be happy I didn't put Other M on here. Better yet, be happy that I didn't put Just Dance 2020 as a goof. At any rate though, which Wii games would you choose to start with on the Switch's online library? Do you think I did a bang-up job, or am I a turd burglar for not rushing certain games out sooner? Either way, vote for some honorable mentions in the poll, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But let me tell you, if there's two people who I would definitely include in the Switch's online service, then it would definitely be today's patrons of the day, Austin Garcia and Andrew Lawler. If you want to be badasses like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes and all kinds of wacky rewards in the mail. And if you want to make cameos, then send pictures or videos of you rocking any FU Game Crew merch doing whatever you want as long as YouTube allows it, like these badasses you see before you. And as always, like and share this video if you want to help this channel grow, and if you want to prove that you're not down with registered sex offenders, then go right ahead and press that subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, all one word, and I'll be back.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.